Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to today's CMS Wire webinar titled Breaking Down Data Silos to Optimize the Customer Experience. My name is Alec. I'm the media and events producer here at CMS Wire, and I'm here today to introduce the webinar, let you know a little bit about the console that you're watching this webinar in, and bring in our two great guests that we have with us today. So let's get started here. First, this is our agenda. This is pretty loose, like I always say. If you've been on one of these, you've heard me say it. Don't hold me to these. These numbers can definitely change throughout the webinar depending on how the discussion is going. But you can see that loose outline here. You can submit questions, and we do encourage you to do so at any time during the webinar by clicking on the Ask a Question tab. It should be appearing below my webcam right now. Just click there, type your question in, and click Submit. If it's content related, we'll keep track of those in the background here. And we'll tee up a few of those questions at the end to our guests, depending on how much time we have left. If it's a technical question, if you're having any tech issues, you can submit those in the Ask a Question tab as well. And I will work with you here in the background to get those resolved. Hopefully we don't need that, but you can find me there in the Ask a Question tab. You could also chat with your fellow attendees by clicking on the chat tab that's right there by the Questions tab. And you can let each other know where you're joining from, discuss the topics that are being discussed on the presentation today, and just have a general chat amongst yourselves there. Here's a little bit about CMS Wire. If you're here, you likely know us, but if you don't, we were founded in 2003. We cover three primary topic areas. That's the digital customer experience, the digital workplace, and information management. We also have a sister website, rework.co. So find out more about CMS Wire, go to cmswire.com. And to find out more about Reworked, you just go to reworked.co. I am very happy to have the support of Freshworks as today's sponsor. We do a lot of work with Freshworks on these events and our virtual conferences and beyond, and it is always greatly appreciated, the support that they provide us here. They're a great company to work with for me as an events producer. I always enjoy seeing them come up on my calendar of events, knowing that I'll get to work with the team there. So again, thank you to Freshworks for sponsoring today's event. You can find out more about Freshworks at www.freshworks.com. All right, here are the headshots of the two guests that you can see in tiny little blocks below me right now. First, we have Seth Early, the CEO of Early Information Science, and you're going to hear a little bit more about Seth here shortly once we get started. But first, we're going to hear from Mukesh Mirchandani. He is the VP of Global Field Solution Engineering at Freshworks. So, Mukesh, why don't you give us a little bit more information about yourself and Freshworks as a company?
Thank you, Alec. I appreciate the introduction, and you absolutely nailed my last name there. Well done, my friend. That one's not easy. So good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. Like Alex said, my name is Mukesh, and I am Vice President of Global Solution Engineering here at Freshworks. You may have heard of Freshworks last week. We had a tiny little event last week. It was our IPO week, and it's a great time to be at Freshworks. Freshworks was founded 11 years ago, and we were founded with this objective of changing how customer experience and employee experience works today. Our CEO is extremely passionate about making sure that customers feel special, customers feel like they are appreciated, and essentially bringing all of the customer data together into a unified place is sort of the thing that we are seriously focused on. So as Freshworks starts to think about customer experience, you'll actually hear this from Seth quite a bit. But as we start to think about customer experience, we are starting to realize that personalized experiences are the way to go. Giving your customers a choice to engage with you is the way to go. And unified customer data is sort of the holy grail to unlock that customer experience. So in the next 45, 50 minutes, I think we're going to talk a little bit about that. But I just want to make sure that the audience understands where I'm going to be coming from today and what Freshworks thinks about when we think about this topic. Over to you, Seth.
Terrific. Well, thank you. And thank you for having me today. Let me go ahead and get started. So we're talking about the data silos, and really when you think about customer experience, there's data that comes from lots of different touch points, lots of different systems and processes. And really the only way to respond appropriately and accurately to customer needs is to understand that data, to be able to harmonize it, to be able to integrate it, and to be able to respond to the customer's interactions and what I like to call their digital body language. What is it they're doing and across lots of different touch points? And then how do we take those signals and respond with an appropriate answer, an appropriate product, an appropriate service, an appropriate piece of content? What's the next best action? And really, it's all about contextualization. It's all about understanding that customer in detail and then understanding what they need when they need it. And so let me go ahead and jump into this. A little bit of my background. I just published a book. That's the headshot that I use these days. The other one, I don't quite look as much like. I look a little more like this one. But anyway, the AI-powered enterprise was published last year, won an award, the Silver Medal, Axiom Silver Medal for Business and AI Books. And we're releasing chapters of it. And if the first 10 people who want to send me a note and send me your address, I'll get a signed copy out to you. So that's kind of an offer I like to make to folks. Sorry about all the bullets on this slide and all the text, but I want to talk about personalization in terms of what we have been trying to do over the years, over the last 15 years. Think about personalization from the perspective of what comprises personalization. What are the components? How do you make that up? And then thinking about the orchestration of customer data, of product information, of content, of knowledge and insights from across the organization, merchandisers who understand the product, customer specialists and who understand the needs of those customers, marketing people, engineering people who understand exactly what a particular customer needs and when they need it. All of that needs to be brought together and systematized and integrated into the fabric of your technology ecosystem. We'll talk about ways to do that. And we really want to think about this 360-degree view of the customer, which is saying, how do we take all those signals from those different touch points and those different systems, and how do we make sense of that? How do we get an understanding of the customer, not from a siloed perspective, but really from that holistic enterprise experience perspective? And because typically when you think about a customer journey or customer lifecycle, there are different departments that are responsible for different aspects. Many times the data that those departments and those functions are capturing and leveraging can be separate in separate systems or separate processes. Many times they're inconsistent in terms of the data structures or the data architecture or the taxonomies. So there's a lot that we need to do to integrate that, to harmonize it, to act on it, to leverage that digital body language, as I say, which is really about understanding the needs of the customer almost real time. It's just like if you had a great salesperson who kind of understood what you needed, anticipated your needs, and was able to fill those needs. I remember a salesperson at a clothing store back when people bought things like suits and went into an office. And this guy would call me up and he'd tell me what was coming in. He knew my taste, he knew my budget. And I would basically go in and he'd give me a bunch of stuff, save all that time because I trusted him. He had good knowledge and he really understood my needs. And that's what we're trying to do when we're thinking about this digital experience. It's personalization at scale, and it's building those one-to-one relationships with large numbers of customers. Now, there's lots of problems and challenges with that. We have data issues, we have process challenges, and I'm going to talk about the concept of fast-moving and slow-moving metadata. That really is about understanding that customer, both in terms of their preferences, their demographics, their firmographics, their interests, their title, their role, their industry, and then thinking about the stuff that moves much more quickly. So that stuff moves slowly, and then we have stuff that moves very quickly. Again, the click-throughs, the campaign responses, the responses to email, the trouble tickets, all these things that, again, tell us what is important to the customer and tell us about how they're interacting and what it is that they need. Now, we'll also talk about how we need to have maturity in different areas. We need to think about what's possible, but what are we prepared for? I'll tell the quick story of an organization we built a personalization data model for. And it was great work. It was, all the information architecture, all the metadata structures to tag content appropriately, to understand the audience, to build that model of the customer. And at the end of the day, at the end of the engagement, they were trying to say, well, all right, what is a differentiated message for these two persona groups or these three personas? They couldn't figure it out. They didn't know. They did not know enough about the customer. So everybody got the same message because they did not know how to truly personalize that experience. So that is a process issue, right? That is a maturity issue. The technology would work, but the process wasn't there. They didn't understand the needs of the customer in enough granularity to be able to say how they were going to differentiate that experience. And then, so we really need to have realistic plans and realistic goals. We need to be able to calibrate those. And the other piece of this is really how to sustain efforts over time, right? We need to have the right data quality. We need to have the right governance processes. And part of it is measuring the impact, but measuring it at multiple levels, right? We need to measure the data, but we also need to measure the impact that data has on a process. And we need to also understand the outcome. Now, I may be stealing some of my thunder, but I think it's always helpful to hear this stuff. That's what I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to tell you what I told you. Again, personalization has been something we've been trying to do for a long time. And the issue is that, there's some algorithms that work, shopping cart analysis. There's various types of ways of trying to predict what a customer would need. I think they're all prediction mechanisms. They're all recommendation engines. We take a signal and then we try to provide a response that's appropriate. But the problem is that many times we don't understand that customer in enough granularity. We don't understand the detail of what they need when they need it. We have to monitor that body language, that digital body language coming from all those systems. And we have to figure out how to respond to it in a way that aligns with their mental model. What is a mental model? Well, when you go to a website and you say, wow, this site has great stuff. I love the merchandise. I love the way it's organized. Oh, it's really intuitive. I understand these organized. Oh, I found some great products. I found what I needed. That is aligned with the way you think about solving your problem or addressing whatever need you have. That is aligned. That information architecture, that information model is aligned with your mental model. It understands how you think and how you go about solving your problem. So that's a way to think about it. We need to be able to understand how users go about their work, how they go about solving their problem, and what those needs are. And that comes from personas, use cases, scenarios, and so on. And then, of course, we have to have the digital machinery. A lot of times people are doing this through acts of heroics, right? But acts of heroics do not scale. So we need to build the systems and the processes and the digital machinery that's going to allow us to orchestrate this at scale. And of course, in order to do this, we have to have consistent data. We have to have harmonized data. We have to have data that is aligned and complete across those channels, across those touch points. So when we don't have those things, it's going to be very difficult to make that work. And Mukesh, you can jump in at any point if you have thoughts and you want to add to the conversation. But so far, so good, right? Anything that comes to mind as you listen to my spiel here?
No, this is fantastic, Seth. And I think for the audience today, you have to remember that personalization, the only way to drive personalization is through data. And so I think that's the critical piece. When I think about customer experience, and especially in the world of Freshworks, when we think about customer experience, we think about data that is captured in marketing, that's captured in sales, that's captured in customer service. And all of it comes together to give you these deep insights. These deep insights are the ones that lead to personalization. So that unification of data that I know, Seth, you're going to talk about quite a bit today, that is so key. That is the holy grail behind unlocking those insights.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's talk about the pieces that we need to put together. Well, first of all, we need to have a journey model that understands and reflects the goals of the audience based on their stage. Now, I usually use the term high fidelity journey model, and I'm going to give you an example of that. But what it is, it's not just a diagram or an image or a picture that represents what the customer is interested in doing and how they feel and how they act and all the touch points. That's great. That gives you great insight. But what do you do with that from a technology perspective? How do your systems use that to respond to those interactions and those needs? We have to do something. We have to build a journey model that actually represents the needs of the customer in data terms, in metadata terms. That is really important, right? Because otherwise, as they go through that journey, well, we need to understand what that digital body language means. So we need to understand what that goal is. And when they act, what does that do to the representation of that customer in our technology systems, right? As Mukesh said, you can only do it with data, right? Our entire digital experience, our entire digital world is comprised of data. So if we don't have the data, or we don't know how to respond to the data, we can't do anything with it. We can't personalize. So the customer data, again, the journey model says what they're trying to do, who they are, how they go about solving their problems, their mental model. The customer data is really pulling together those different signals, those different touch points, and being able to consolidate it. What is the impact of a click-through on a website versus a response to a campaign? Well, those are kind of different things, but they're also signals that impact how we can represent the customer. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done to understand that. You know, we once worked with a pharmaceutical company that was trying to understand how to consolidate signals from physicians when they either attended a luncheon or picked up the phone. Well, those are both signals, but how do you equate those? And how does that go into a model that tells you how engaged they are? So there's a lot of work that needs to be done with that, in addition to making sure that the systems speak to one another, that they have the right organizing principles, that they're consistent. We also need to understand what each of those signals means. Now, product data is another piece of this, right? Everybody sells products of some sort, services. Sometimes they're productized services. But the point here is, what is it about that product that's important to your user? And if you take a B2B industrial manufacturer, for example, they may have a type of persona that's a design engineer. Design engineer is probably going to have different needs and look at different attributes of a product than a procurement manager, right? They're going to be very different. They care about different things. Those will also be different from a maintenance engineer, for example, who might be looking at replacement parts or looking at upgrading systems. One is looking for long-term design. The other one's looking for, pricing, availability, supply chain issues. So those different attributes have to somehow be mined and somehow be conveyed throughout the food chain. I like to say a product supply chain is an information supply chain. So we need to harvest that data from the heads of the engineers and the marketing managers and the customer specialists, and we need to surface it in the right context for the customer. Same thing with content. What content is supporting that? What content is supporting the users making a decision? Maybe it's a product comparison guide. Maybe it's an installation guide. Maybe it's a solution guide. That type of content also has to be aligned with the right metadata model so that we can put these things together. And knowledge is kind of a bucket that takes the human creativity and talks about how that creativity needs to be applied. The insights from, say, analytics, the insights from user studies, the insights from customer specialists, product merchandisers, the people that really understand the customer and the needs of the customer. It does become content at some point, but the whole process of creating that knowledge, of solving those problems, is a different mechanism. It's a collaboration process. And we need to be able to share and reuse knowledge throughout that whole dynamic creation, that orchestration process, from the time we're onboarding products to the time they're getting to the website, aligned with marketing materials, aligned with support materials, aligned with lots of other stuff. So I'm going to go through a bit of an animation. Now, this was actually a simplified version. And if you guys want the full fidelity version, I can certainly get that to you or walk through it. But again, when we're doing things like, developing products or onboarding products, whether we're manufacturing or distributing, there's stuff that has to happen to actually bring the data into the systems. And at the same time, we're doing stuff in parallel in terms of market planning and promotions. We're doing demand generation. We're doing product onboarding. There are various roles that are involved with this, and various types of content information that needs to be managed and created. And then what we think about is we have to put all of this into a content strategy. Now, content strategy can be very broad. It can include knowledge. It can include demand gen. It can include customer service, customer support, and everything that goes into our e-commerce experience from the content perspective. Product information, content, digital assets, supporting knowledge, all of that stuff needs to go into these systems. Now, We have lots of systems that are when we're sending out campaigns, we're getting responses. When we're looking at click-throughs on e-commerce site, we're getting responses. We're getting something that tells us what's important, and we're getting that digital body language. These are signals that are coming from these different systems. If a customer is picking up the phone and calling support, that's because they had a problem that they couldn't solve on the website. That's a signal, right? That's part of that digital body language. If they're clicking through to a product landing page, but they're not going to a product detail page, or they're not putting something in their shopping cart, that's a signal, right? That tells us something is going on. When they're responding to stuff, all of these things are telling us something about the customer. And so when we start looking at all of this, that is what we have to take into consideration and understand and respond to when we're building out a personalized experience. Personalization is not bolted on at the end. It's really part of this orchestration of all of these different pieces. Now, we could also, and I'll stop for a second, Mukesh. I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. Did you have? I showed you a more complex version, which some people found a little overwhelming. So this is a bit of a simplified version, but I think it gets some of the message across.
Yeah, and I think that's spot on, Seth. I think it really depends on industry. It depends on the type of business you are. And I think you talked very briefly about taxonomy. Mm-hmm. And I think that is a critical part of how you think about the orchestration, how you think about the type of data that comes together. Mm-hmm. What I tell our customers all the time is that not all data is equal. Right. And there are pieces of data that are more impactful. There are pieces of data that are less impactful. Mm-hmm. If you look at a typical customer journey, I know you touched on customer journey a little bit, but if you think about a typical customer journey, your customers are researching you very heavily on your website. They are probably downloading white papers. They're probably signing up for trials and things like that. Then you've got the actual selling process, and then customers start using your product, your service, and then they start having problems with it, right? That's the nature of the game. And so there are so many pieces of data, and therefore the taxonomy of the data is very critical. What is more important at which stage of the customer journey is something that plays a big role in that orchestration. So I think you're spot on in terms of the complexity behind some of these things, right? These things are hard problems to solve.
They are, and I like to say that simplicity is hidden complexity, right? When people say to me, "Oh my God, this is too complex," well, my magical device here, my phone, is a very simple device at one level, but there's a lot of complexity in there, right? There's a lot of complexity, and it's hidden by the interface, and the usage is simple because all that complexity is hidden from the user. And you mentioned taxonomy and metadata and information architecture. Well, that is an area that we've been working in for 25 years and is our sweet spot. And so I'm going to talk about that and talk about how those pieces come together. So thank you for that feedback. And yes, it is all about that architecture. Now, here's a diagram that kind of talks about data sources and touch points. And this is just to give you, this is not complete. I actually had another diagram that had way more text in it. I took some of that out to simplify. But the idea is that you have these different systems that are consuming and producing information throughout that life cycle. So when we say 360-degree view, you can kind of visualize it as, well, what are they doing in these different areas? How are they responding to our touch points? How are they responding to promotions? How are they navigating the site? How are they finding the site in the first place? How are they dealing with support? You know, are we gathering the voice of the customer feedback on an ongoing basis where we can start to do text analytics? What's going on in social media? So the point here is that all of these different data sources, and sometimes for some organizations, they can have 10, 20, 30 systems that touch the customer in one way, shape, or form. And we need to align that with the stage of the journey and then start looking at those signals so that we can respond back with, again, the next best product, the next best action, the next best piece of content, whatever that might be. So I'm going to show you this in another way as well. But I just want to talk a little bit about the challenges when we start to think about these disparate systems, these disparate processes, these different platforms. We certainly have challenges around process, right? We need to make sure that the business is aligned and the business and process is aligned with the needs of the customer and with the functionality of the system. And we have to have change management and ongoing governance and metrics. The biggest thing that organizations say to us is, we have to solve this problem every 18 months. We don't want to do that anymore, right? Because you fix the data, you get the architecture right, and then new products come on board, new knowledge, new content, new people. And if there's not the right governance process and change management, I know people don't like that term, let's call it decision-making process, decision-making authority and decision-making processes. That's what governance is, right? It's a body and a decision-making process. And usually there's metrics to tell you what you should be doing. And then, of course, there's the integration and data quality challenges, right? So we have challenges on both sides of this. So here's one way to think about this, right? So I talked about the different systems. This is just a sampling. This is not complete by any means, but each of these systems are producing and consuming data. And you can start to see that there's a representation of the customer or the prospect in each of these systems. Many times these systems have grown up over time, maybe independently, maybe they likely come from different vendors, which is what's nice about Freshworks. You have a platform, and that platform inherently eliminates many of those data silos. I don't know, it doesn't include all of this stuff, but it includes enough of this so that you can make sure that you're being able to take advantage of the consistency in terms of how the platform was designed. But again, these different systems will have different representations of the customer, as well as what those interactions mean. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Mukesh, in terms of your platform? And again, this is not a sales pitch, but just to kind of think about how to solve this problem from a bigger perspective.
Absolutely, absolutely. No sales pitches here. We are here to give our audience content that helps you think about this differently, right? And to me, you're never going to have all of the data in a single system. It's just not going to happen. And so IT organizations play such a big role in bringing that data together. Business plays a big role in defining what data is important. But to me, try to invest as much as you can in systems where a lot of different types of data can live easily, right? And so I'll talk a little bit about Freshworks, because we have this very critical concept that we've developed called the Unified Customer Record. Mm-hmm. The UCR, or the Unified Customer Record, is basically a single place where you can look at sales data, you can look at marketing data, you can look at customer support data, right? Mm-hmm. But then in our platform, we also have the ability to pull in data from other sources, such as an order management system, such as an e-commerce system, such as Shopify, for example. And so what happens is that you create this unified view of the data in a single platform that your users can then use. Mm. But Seth, users using a platform is one part of the story, because you've written a book on the AI-powered enterprise, and we all know that once you have data in one place, that's when your machine learning can be most effective, right? If you think about why a lot of machine learning fails, it's not that the model is inadequate. It's that the data is not sufficient to provide the insights. And so bringing data, like think about why so many organizations are building embedded CDP platforms. Mm-hmm. Why do the segments of the world exist, right? Part of it is to bring the data together, but then part of it is also to run machine learning on that data so you can get the right insights. So I think about this in your slide. You very cleanly laid out different types of data and the integration challenges, but organizations that actually overcome these challenges are going to get the best use from their machine learning investments.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, what's interesting, kind of timely, when my book was launched, I wrote an article for the Harvard Business Review with my co-author on the article, Josh Bernoff, and it was called, "Is Your Data Infrastructure Ready for AI?" And it was exactly this question, because most of the time, data scientists spend a lot of their time being data janitors, right? Trying to clean things up. And what works in a POC or a pilot or in a self-contained environment doesn't always work in production, because you don't have the ability to spend all that time on the data. That's why the data has to be fixed upstream. That's why we spend a lot of time with our customers fixing data, building those consistent architectures, building those consistent taxonomies, and then putting in the governance processes and the change management and educating the organization so that they know how to keep it up to date and it works in production. Coincidentally, Harvard Business Review editors chose that article for an upcoming print edition that takes articles from their archives, and they selected that piece for the November issue. So so if you guys keep your eyes open, you'll see Harvard Business Review on the newsstands, and there'll be a piece on data infrastructure, which you can share with your leadership. But yes, this is really the critical problem, and the critical challenge is resolving and harmonizing this and understanding what these pieces mean. Now, we also have the problem of IT and business stakeholders. I actually just wrote an article about this for Customer Think, which will be coming out soon. But IT cares about data quality and standardization and governance and integration and service levels. And the business has to understand, revenue, value of a customer, campaign responses, all of that cross-channel experience, all of the customer support pieces, the loyalty, and so on. But sometimes what happens on the business side is they don't necessarily take ownership for their data and don't take responsibility for keeping that data clean. Imagine, and it really has to be a partnership. IT can help fix a backlog of bad data and clean it up, but it can't be responsible for all of it, because imagine this scenario. Imagine you have a customer relationship management system and your salespeople are not following process and they're not documenting their conversations and their communications and their proposals, not updating their pipeline, and they're not using the CRM. That's a data problem, but it's a process problem. IT, you cannot go to IT and say, you got to fix this data in Salesforce or HubSpot or whatever. They can't fix that. That is a business problem and a business process problem. So there's overlap. We have to think of both of those pieces, but we have to have the right role for IT to help with that backlog, to put the standards in place, to build a partnership with business so that they can build the right approval processes and governance processes and metrics, but it really has to tie both of those things together. So let's take a deeper look at customer data models and think about this from the perspective. It's fast moving and slow moving metadata. Sometimes you can call it explicit or objective or applied. Some of it's derived or subjective, but the point is there's stuff that moves fast, there's stuff that moves slow. Slower moving might be customer type, business or consumer. It might be some of the demographics. It could be some of the account details. It could be the relationship. It could be content preferences. It could be equipment, right? It changes, but it doesn't change, moment to moment, day to day. Then we have the stuff that is faster moving, the click-throughs, the campaign responses, the dynamic segmentation, the behavioral segmentation, the loyalty attributes. That is the real-time digital body language. So we need to represent our customer. We need to build data models to represent both of these aspects of the customer. We can use this for personalization to create dynamic navigation or present certain products that would be relevant to particular users. But we also can give a very real-time set of recommendations and products and so on. And I'm going to show you how that works. This is where the high-fidelity journey models come into play. So again, what's the customer journey? This is a simple one. Aware, shop, buy, install, use, renew, right? Very simple. I'll show you a more complex one a little bit later. What are the details of the customer? Again, who are they? What kind of industry are they in? What's their position? What's their role? What's their interest? And then we have the dynamic stuff. And we define what content they need. What do they need to move through this process, right? So here's how it will work. And this kind of cuts across those different areas of user journey models, content models, product data models, and then the knowledge architecture. Now, there's a much more detailed version of this. Again, if anybody wants to dig into that and spend time with me and, generally have their mind blown, that's what people tell me. It's a lot of stuff, but it's aspirational, but it's okay. You can still work toward it. I'd be happy to go through the details. But again, here's the customer model. And here are the things that are slower moving. So again, I call it static, but it's the industry, it's the role, it's the interest, those types of things. Then we have the dynamic information, the stuff that is the click-through responses and the real-time, the recent purchases, the trouble tickets, and so on. As we go through this process, as we do things, download white papers, that's a signal. And that signal needs to be consolidated with some type of a customer data platform. It needs to be integrated. So again, as I do these different things and go through my journey, each time I do that, you can see that it's going to change the metadata model of that customer, the real-time metadata model. Now, here's how it would work. So I download a white paper. That indicates that I have top of the funnel content, right? And that's from our product specialists. The CDP is going to take that. It's going to inform the product information management system and the content management system to make a recommendation. Again, it's just taking that signal, understanding between the dynamic and static or fast-moving, slow-moving metadata. This is what we recommend. Then we do something else. We're going to do a product comparison guide. Well, again, that is another piece of content, middle of the funnel content according to our knowledge architecture and our product specialists. The CDP is going to take that signal and make a recommendation, inform the product information management system and the content management system to present other information. Again, same thing. As we go through this, each time we do something on the site, we are changing that metadata model, and that informs how our information is presented back. And even back to the post-purchase content. Again, renewing, now you want to present other information. Maybe you want to give people a guide on how to get the best from their product, or maybe you want to sell them an upgrade and sell them the super widget, right? There's a promotion, there's upsell, there's a current customer, existing customer, user tips, all of those types of things. So this process, it may seem complex, but really you have to think of it at the right level of granularity. You're not necessarily going to do it on individual customers, but you're going to do it at a level of persona. But over time, you can actually leverage machine learning and a component authoring system, as well as a component messaging architecture. That's getting into the detail we don't have time for today, where you can do this at scale and almost get this to an individual experience that will be unique for all of your customers. I wanted to pause there for a second and get your thoughts, Mukesh.
Yeah, this is fascinating, isn't it? Because I think as a concept, a personalized experience is easy, but at scale, that's when that's when it starts to break down. And I think again, I'll kind of look at it, Seth, from the point of view of Freshworks, because one of the things that you'll recognize in a customer experience is that different customers will engage with you in different ways, and different customers will choose their channels of convenience, whether it's a phone, whether it's a white paper, whether it's a knowledge base article, right? And so when you bring when you think about, I know you talked about intelligent personalization, but when I think about all of the data elements that a customer has already touched us with, right? I think finding that intelligence, finding those critical signals, those buying signals, or that signals of frustration where a customer is about to leave you, and if they've reached out to you about the same issue 4 times and you can't really tell because your data systems aren't connected and your channels aren't connected, I think that's when it starts to break down a little bit, right? And so when you talk about what does it take to do this right, right, and what does it mean to create the right insights and create the right touch points on the customer journeys, to me, doing it right is putting your customer profile at the heart of it all.
Right.
And
exactly.
let the metadata sort of sit around the customer profile, and don't ignore any part of the customer profile. So sales, marketing, service, these are all important parts of the customer profile. Their orders are a very important part of their customer profile. So make sure that when you think about personalization, define what those important data elements are. But this is absolutely accurate. I think intelligent personalization is the way to go.
Yeah, and we've been writing and researching and doing pieces of this for lots of organizations. We've done implementations of this, and we're starting to see organizations who began this process many years ago really executing. This also works for things like chatbots and intelligent virtual assistants. Those are just channels to information. And a chatbot is really when you take a signal and utterance from a user, You classify it according to an intent. That intent could have multiple dimensions, and then you're feeding them back information, right? You're giving them an answer, and that answer is a recommendation. That answer is a personalized experience. So really the same principles apply in lots of different ways and lots of different technologies. Let me just see if I can get my cursor back here. So when I look at this, this really requires that we have maturity. There's a bunch of, I'm going to show you a maturity model in just a second, but you really have to be mature in multiple areas, because in order to do this right and to do it at scale, and again, nobody is perfect, and it doesn't mean you have to be at like, some people don't like maturity models. To me, a maturity model just says, you know, where are you today and where do you need to be based on your process and based on your needs and your customer needs and the competitive marketplace and so on. But we have to have that ability to consolidate and integrate customer data. We have to have a handle on it. It has to be good quality. We have to have some understanding of that customer journey. The content needs to also be in good shape. We have to know where it is. We have to be able to componentize it. We have to have a capability. And one of our longtime clients has built this so that they can publish once. It's a very large technology company. Publish once, and then it gets distributed out to multiple channels, to channel partners, to customer self-service, to the website, customer support, field service, even embedded content within their tools. And what that does is it sets them up perfectly to be able to do this at scale, because really organizations are competing on that knowledge and that content. And we start looking at intelligent virtual assistants and how those will evolve in the next several years. Those run on knowledge and content, right? So we have to be able to componentize, but they are saving hundreds of millions of dollars per year based on that architecture that was built for them many years ago. They've been executing on it, and it does take time. Again, product data, super important. We have to have the right attributes, the right cleaned data and complete data, and it has to be aligned with the needs. The knowledge architecture is super important. And then the governance, the metrics-driven governance. And I can go into a whole presentation on that, but we don't have time for that obviously today. But these different maturity models are subsumed into an orchestration model that says if you are very, very weak in one area, it's going to be difficult to do this at scale in a very sophisticated way. That's okay. Nobody's there, right? No organizations are really, you know, unless they're born digital and they have started with this and, you know, they have the foundation in place from the beginning. But most organizations who don't have a greenfield have problems with legacy systems, content, data, knowledge, et cetera. But the point here is that you can map this out to remediate the areas where you're weak, where you have gaps, where you have less maturity, and use that as a roadmap to build those capabilities over time, and then to calibrate what's realistic today. A lot of times people are you know, their vision is beyond their reach, right? They want to do things, but they don't understand it takes a year to get to another level of maturity. And if your leadership is saying, well, why can't this be done in 6 months? And you're at level 1 in an area and you need to be at level 3, well, it's not going to happen in 6 months unless you really put a lot of resources into it. So the point here is this gives you a way of calibrating what's appropriate and how you can move this ahead effectively and successfully. Now, this is just a customer information maturity model. I'm not going to spend time in this, but what I do want to spend time on, just to give you one example, what I do want to spend time on a little bit more is to talk about ways of sustaining these efforts, because we need to link this to business outcomes, right? It's very difficult to get funding for data quality issues, right? Because it's an afterthought. It's done at the end of the project, right? People think they can just outsource it to an offshore provider. That's not always the case. And when you start looking at this, you know, people want to know, well, how do I know the taxonomy or the content or search or the data is right? How do we know it's working? Meanwhile, the CEO says, well, how does this increase revenue? And you can't have that direct correlation, but you can have different correlation between the data and content. You can measure there. You can measure with heuristics and fill rates and quality, and there's multiple dimensions around this. When we do a report, it can have 20 different dimensions. But that data, that content supports a process. And that's where we want to start looking at process scores. We need baselines, and we need to know how we're going to move the needle on a particular process, because data supports the process. Process can then be correlated with a business outcome. right? So what this is the level that, as my colleague Chris Penn says, either people get bonused at, or it catalyzes a resume generating event, right? This is where things happen at the business unit level and executives are responsible. But the point here is we have to align that with a process and look at the outcome and understand the impact of the data on the outcome. And then that aligns with enterprise strategy, and we have to establish that linkage. Now, we take this to the next level, we can start looking at it across the entire journey. We have each stage, and many times different departments are still responsible for stages of the journey, even though they collaborate. We have processes within each of these departments that we can measure. We can measure those baselines. We can measure the impact on the process. We have accountabilities, right? This is where the outcome, the business outcome, is measured, right? So what are the things that that department is responsible for? And then we have tools and technologies. Now, we take that, we call it the layer cake, and we kind of invert it. And we say we can measure the quality of our deployments. There's a whole methodology around that. I can send a white paper on that if people would like. It's actually from the Journal of Applied Marketing Analytics, but it gives you a mechanism to score the technology as well as the data. So we can score that. We can see how well we're doing. That's the bottom of that layer cake. Then we have process outcomes, right? These are the process scorecards that we talked about. And again, each department can have these. And then finally, we have the business outcomes. So the point here is that we can measure this stuff and we can link it and we can have correlations and we can show that we're moving the needle and we can show that we're getting the return. And this also fits into that governance, 7 governance processes. So that's what I have for today. I know there was a lot there, but I gave you the simple version. So hopefully that made sense. And I think we will have some time. But Mukesh, let me get your thoughts before I tie up and go to the Q&A slide.
Yeah, I was really intrigued by the maturity models discussion and the slides, Seth. I think that maturity models are absolutely critical. And what I recommend to our customers is when you're building those maturity models for yourself, and as you're trying to decide your journey, put your customer at the heart of it.
Right.
Because remember, at the end of the day, we are talking about data silos that exist with customer data. Right. So whenever you do journey mapping, whenever you think about maturity modeling, put the customer at the heart of it, put your business at the heart of it, and think about what would you like your customer journey to look like? What would you like your customers to experience when they engage with you? This might sound counterintuitive, but once you design the right maturity models, you can actually drive a predictable customer experience.
Absolutely.
I think this is the key. I think most companies do maturity modeling because they want to see themselves evolving. Mm-hmm. I tell my customers, don't worry about your evolution, worry about your customer's experience.
Right.
And if you can make your customer's experience predictable, you've already evolved. So put your customers at the heart of this process, and your maturity modeling will be so much more fruitful. It'll be so much more fun. That's what I'd like to add on top of that.
Absolutely. Totally agree. And the point here is you can measure all these. By the way, all of this is in my book. I'm just going to shift to this. This is some things that people have said about it. Tom Davenport, Pete Johnson from MetLife. They've all said really good things about it. It's gotten some good feedback, and all of these approaches are in the book. So again, that offer still stands for the first 10 people, but let me go back and see if we have questions. So Alec, did you want to see if we have anything from the audience? Or did we explain everything in such great detail that there are no questions? We can't hear you. Are you speaking? Are you on mute? Alec, we cannot hear you. Can you hear me? Mukesh, can you hear me?
Seth, can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Yep. I wasn't on mute. It had selected a different microphone. So I was saying, we're not letting you off that easy. We do have questions here, so we'll get into those now. If you have a question, please don't hesitate to continue submitting them. Just click that Ask a Question tab, type your question in, and click Submit. But we're going to start with this one here that I have from Shiva. And the question is, what are some things that have been done during the remote work environment to break down some silos that you've seen?
Well, one of the things about remote work has catalyzed a lot of transformation. One of my colleagues said that they actually accelerated about a 2-year program into about 8 weeks. Now, that can't happen without some corners being cut, right? So, in my experience, a lot of things were stood up, a lot of things were put in place, but with a lot of technical debt. So while organizations needed to do things like handle massive amounts of new customer service requests because of all of the problems that were happening, all the adaptation, what I found was that they were able to put in place point solutions, but it did not, from the companies that I've talked to, did not incent them to necessarily go back and deal with technical debt. And in fact, some of these things were deployed with increases in technical debt, unless they went to a brand new platform. But people were scrambling so much at the beginning of the remote work catalyzed by the pandemic that they really had to get things stood up very, very quickly. And that had to, and things had to suffer. You couldn't do it as thoroughly and in greater detail as necessary. But some of that's being remediated now. So I think it became a catalyst. I think it became an important driver for a better customer experience. But we're still seeing companies kind of catch up and fill in and backfill. Mukesh, what has your experience been?
Yeah, it's, the last 18 or 19 months have absolutely sucked. So we'll start there.
It's a technical term, isn't it?
That's a very technical term, yes. But I'll tell you 3 things that I've observed from our customer base. One, I agree with Seth. The pandemic has accelerated a lot of initiatives. I think it has been, maybe some of it is due to budgets. There's more cash left because there isn't enough travel happening or whatever, right? But I think there has been funding for these initiatives. That's number one. The second thing I think has happened is that a lot of companies that had some tech stack that was on premise have found a way to move it to the cloud. So I think while we've been talking about moving to the cloud for a decade, I think there's still elements of some companies' tech stacks that are on premise, and I think that movement is happening. And then I think the third thing, Seth, that I've observed is that the digital footprint of customer engagement has grown.
Right.
So the physical in-person stores and going into a store doesn't exist anymore, right? Like it does, it's starting to come back. But I think the digital presence, the online catalogs, the online information, customer experience channels have moved towards messaging, in my opinion. I think a lot of organizations over the last couple of years have actually invested in bots and chat and messaging, because those are channels that a lot of our customers prefer today. So I think these are some of the trends we've seen that are sort of like make sense, actually, because that's where we need to go as a collective human race, right? Better engagement, better experiences. So I think COVID's sped that up a little bit.
Absolutely. Totally agree. And a lot of what I talk about in my book is really the evolution of intelligent virtual assistants and what we need to do to get there. There's still a lot of brittle bots out there, and they're still expensive and they're still limited in functionality. But one of the things that I envision and talk about in the first chapter is just this scenario where that's all people do. This protagonist in the book interacts with virtual assistants throughout his entire workday and personal day. And that's where we'll be. They will be very high functioning. They will be very capable. And I think in the next 5 years, we're going to see a tremendous shift in that. But again, that requires that that organizations get these foundational pieces in place, because they can't do it without it, because they don't run by themselves. They're not magic. They run on the things you teach them and what you provide them. That's a whole separate topic, but I just wanted to make that comment.
All right, great. Yeah, we're going to move on. We have a few minutes left here. So I'll start with you again on this, Seth, but this comes from Sharon. Sharon's question is, what are your recommendations on easing stakeholders' concerns on data sharing or data lake building from a technical perspective and a cultural perspective, respectively?
Yeah. Well, this is a very important piece. So we're talking about internal stakeholders. There's always, there's always a challenge of getting people to kind of open up what they're doing and their systems and processes. And for large organizations, there's a lot of risk, right? If they have confidential information, if they have certain information that needs to be controlled in particular ways, people are less willing to be able to open things up that they've traditionally controlled. And we see that in a lot of organizations. People are kind of used to managing their own data. It's theirs, it's for their department, their usage, and there's a reluctance to be able to do that. The only way to overcome that is really to start talking about the benefits of doing this and the efficiencies and the effectiveness and the new capabilities. And sometimes you have to go to higher authority, right? Because a particular part of the organization may not be incented to share their data based on their metrics, but somebody else will be incented to do that or has an interest in doing that. So sometimes you have to be able to escalate this. But a critical piece is really that governance process, right? There has to be a governance process in place that tells the organization what those policies are, how they should be dealing with data ownership, how they should be dealing with data quality, provenance, downstream usage, upstream sources, onboarding of data. And it's really a very, very big problem and challenge for organizations. They don't know what data they have. They don't necessarily know the quality. There's a lot of rework. We did a project for a financial services firm that had to look at chains of trust throughout the organization. And when someone was trying to produce a particular report for a client, they went back and validated all these information sources multiple times because they did not trust the sources. So the people that were responsible for owning those data sources really needed to be in closer communication with their downstream users, their downstream stakeholders, as well as have a mechanism to report on this and to manage it and to set policy at an enterprise level. So there has to be a governance authority, and it has to be woven into existing governance processes in order to establish those policies, those procedures, those guidelines. And it even goes back to service level agreements for outside data sources, for vendors, for people that are giving you data. Data comes from someplace, and we need to understand what its purpose will be, what we can do with it. And part of that is saying, well, look, we have a need for this data in this other part of the organization, and therefore, someone needs to authorize that. And even if the data owner says, hey, it's my data, well, it's not really your data, right? It's the organization's data. So sometimes you have to go to higher authority, but the governance process should help with that.
All right. Well, thank you. That's going to be all the time we have, guys. So Mukesh and Seth, thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. And thanks to all of you in the audience. We weren't able to get to nearly all the questions. We had a lot of them come in.
Send them off, and we can answer them in a post or a white paper. So we'll be happy to continue that conversation with folks.
Great. Yeah, I know that's greatly appreciated. Thank you, Seth. We'll have all that information recorded. And speaking of that information being recorded, this webinar was also recorded. So keep an eye on your inbox for the link to the on-demand version in about 2 business days. But again, thank you to everybody in the audience for participating. And thank you again to Seth and Mukesh. And once more, a big shout out to Freshworks for sponsoring. Yeah, thank you. It was a big shout out to Freshworks for sponsoring today's event. It's always a pleasure, like I said, to work with the team over there. So thanks again to them. If your company's interested in sponsoring a webinar like today's, just email us at webinars@cmswire.com and we'll be in touch. But in the meantime, thank you for hanging out with us today, and we'll see you all next time.
Bye now.